to have a brief business meeting, and then we're going to have two presenters share their research with us. So I'll go ahead and get started. See if my slides will advance for me. There we go. So our agenda is very short. Sorry, I am very inarticulate today. I would like to welcome our new chair, Dr. Brian McGarry. He is the information literacy librarian at Dickinson College. He has an MLIS from the University of Pittsburgh and a PhD in American Cultural Studies from Bowling Green State University. Welcome, Brian. We are actually co-chairs for this new year, but he is taking the lead on that as part of our new transition plans in ESS. And the majority of our activities from the last year have been around a membership survey for the European Studies section. Tara Murray is going to lead that discussion for us. I'm going to go ahead and just pass that over to her.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Let me just get my slides up here. Okay, can you see my slides okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. This is Tara Murray, member of the Research and Planning Committee, and as Nicole said, one of our major tasks for this past year was to conduct a survey of the membership, and all of the members of the committee participated in distributing the survey and analyzing the results. Oops. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the survey and its results. But if you're interested in more detail, the full survey report is available on the ALA Institutional Repository. There's a link there, and that's also been distributed by email. So a little background on the survey. In 2017, the Western European Studies section and the section for Eastern European Studies merged to form the European Studies section S, which is what we are today. And then in 2018, the Research and Planning Committee was charged with conducting a membership survey to better understand the composition and needs of the merged section. And then later in fall of 2018, the survey was distributed to the S membership. And we collected the responses, did some analysis, and the final survey report was distributed in January 2019. So the goals of our survey were to find out who are the members of this section and what would they like to get out of their membership. So the purpose is to inform the section's activities going forward. The survey results confirmed some of our general expectations. The typical section member has an academic affiliation, has some kind of subject specialist role, has at least in part a public service role, and is engaged in collection development activities. But we also found that S members work in a variety of settings and roles. So these include some non-academic research libraries, such as large public libraries, and special libraries, including government and museum libraries. Some of the member interests that came out in the survey were, sorry, I'm seeing a chat here, but I can't actually see it. Sorry. So some of the member interests that came out of the survey were that our members were interested in emerging areas of librarianship, such as digital humanities and scholarly publishing. Members have a wide range of geographic interests in areas and languages within and beyond Europe. So even though we're the European Studies section, many of our members have interests and responsibilities outside of that area. There is within the section more interest in Western Europe than Eastern Europe, which is not really surprising considering that the Western European Studies section was larger than the Eastern European section prior to the merger. We also found some areas for growth and development. These include virtual communication platforms, and the committee in our report recommended to develop digital member resources and means of communication, such as a website with online forums and sharing tools. We also found some areas for growth in programming to supplement the in-person events that we have at the conference. So this could include programs for our core audience of subject specialists interested in European languages, as well as programs focused on emergent areas that I mentioned our members are interested in. And we can pull from experts within our membership as presenters and teachers. We do have some non-library members who may have unique expertise and knowledge that could be leveraged for programming. And we also have a mix of newer members and long-term members, so that tells us that there are potentially some good experts within our membership. And the survey also suggested some partnerships with related organizations which we could leverage, especially for these kinds of virtual programs. So that is a quick overview of the survey results, and now I will turn it over to Brian to get started with the research forum.
Okay, thank you. So the ESS Research Forum offers an opportunity to discuss one's research on nearly any topic related to Europe in an informal setting. Our first speaker is Michael Kicey. He is the Humanities Liaison Librarian at the University of Buffalo, SUNY. He holds a PhD in Comparative Literature from the University of Michigan and an MLS from Syracuse University. He is interested in digital humanities, electronic and scholarly reading, and libraries and librarians as content creators. His presentation is titled No Budget, No Skills, No Filler, Changing the Game with Topic LibGuides of All Things. And now I will turn it over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Brian. If everyone can hear me, I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Michael Kicey. I am Michael Kicey. I am Humanities Liaison Librarian, as Brian just told you, at University of Buffalo in the SUNY system. I want to thank ACRL ESS for inviting me to speak today, and Nicole and Brian in particular, and also my co-presenter, Emma. What I want to talk about today is my rather surprising experience with building, of all things, a LibGuide, and actually getting sort of the payoff from building that LibGuide, getting payoff comparable to what you would see with a digital humanities project, something much more expensive and extensive than this project actually was. Getting feedback and actually kind of ending up sort of creating a community and discovering all sorts of avenues for professional development and intellectual development for myself by doing something that was really kind of not meant to be very fancy or eye-grabbing, but it ended up being really rewarding for me. So now it seems strange, of course, most of you, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with LibGuides, or you're even kind of tired of LibGuides by this point, and it seems kind of surprising that I would be talking about LibGuides as something fresh and exciting. This is in part because LibGuides have a reputation among academic librarians as being kind of a necessary evil. They're something that we put together to respond to community needs, to show the resources that we have available. They're not meant to be exciting and fresh. They're meant to be sort of a one-stop shopping location for databases and resources, that kind of thing. But we often find also that the audience for LibGuides ends up being chiefly internal. The people who end up using LibGuides, despite our best efforts to promote them to other audiences, other stakeholders, usually end up being other librarians. Another, not part of its reputation, but I think sort of a wider problem maybe with the way that people approach or use LibGuides is that there's very often a lack of familiarity among librarians about the really kind of impressive and attractive advanced features that are built into the LibGuides framework, which actually can make guides more usable, more friendly, more attractive, more pleasing, and in fact more substantial than simply sort of sticking to a list of links sitting on a page. Of course, you know, the more advanced and the more advanced features, the more advanced you get with LibGuides, it does tend to take up more time and energy. But I'm here to tell you today that the payoff that you get if you put a little more time and energy into a LibGuide, doing it on something that you care about and creating a community about it, can actually be very, very rewarding. The best ways to start approaching a project like this, and I'm going to talk to you about my own experience very briefly. The best way to start approaching it is to forget about the name of LibGuides, forget really that it has anything to do with libraries, and kind of sort of libraries and strictly community support the way that it's been used. And think of it simply as a very powerful multi-purpose web design suite with a relatively low bar in technical know-how in order to sort of get a leg up and get started with a project. And it's also a pretty sophisticated, it's not super sophisticated, but it's actually a pretty sophisticated content management system. And if you know how to, if you know your way around LibGuides and you know some of the advanced features, you can build something actually really compelling. SpringShare offers a number of tutorials on its site to tell people how to use these more advanced features, and they're very approachable. They also offer live online trainings as well. And if you happen to have already in your wheelhouse some experience with HTML and CSS, that doesn't hurt. I had such experience when I was in library school recently, but it's by no means necessary. It's not something that is absolutely crucial for creating a guide like the one that I created. So to talk a bit about my experience, several years ago, I first read the 20th century French novelist Marcel Proust, his novel In Search of Lost Time, also translated in English as In Remembrance of Things Past. The French title is À la recherche du temps perdu. I read this novel several years ago, and I loved it so much that I decided to form a research project around it, which I still continue to actively work on. As a result of that interest and the research that I was doing, I was working progressively through scholarship and writing on Proust, specifically in English, from Proust's own time up to the very present. And I was in the course of it, I was building a very extensive bibliography, more or less very close to an exhaustive bibliography of criticism on Proust in English. 2 years ago when I came to UB, I was very excited about potentially putting together a fully featured, robust digital edition of Proust, and I still hope to do that. But when I sort of looked around and I looked at sort of the situation of faculty and students, I realized that there wasn't really a significant community of scholars here at UB in my home institution, that's University of Buffalo, to sort of buy in and kind of help me along this process, that if I wanted to do something like a digital edition or a project of that profile right away, a lot of it would sort of be on me. So also in my travels around the internet, it gradually dawned on me that there was no free online guide the way that a LibGuide can be. There was no free online guide to research in English on Proust that would be comparable to the thing that I ended up creating. There's websites created by scholars. There's websites created by amateurs, people who just love Proust. There's certainly things in French that are comparable, but I noticed there's not really anything in English. There's no one-stop shopping for finding out about scholarship, criticism, historical context, that kind of thing on Proust that would be very appealing to a very broad audience, even outside the academy. So I found myself in this position where I had some freedom to put together a summer project. I had no budget. I had no very impressive tech skills. I had no mountains of data or anything very impressive along the way of building an interface, but also I had a lot of great scholarly content. I had a massive bibliography. I built up some substantial expertise on what I was interested in working on, and I wanted to do something with it. So I created a summer project of constructing this research guide on Proust. I'm not going to show you the Proust guide because I don't really have time to. But I noticed from the statistics that I look at that maybe a few of you have visited already. If you haven't, I encourage you to. It's at research.lib.buffalo.edu/Proust. Coming out of library school, excuse me, I had not had experience with LibGuides up until that summer when I started working on my own. So a lot of starting to work on the guide was teaching myself how to use LibGuides. It took me about 3 to 4 months from absolutely no knowledge whatsoever about LibGuides to the completed Proust guide, and I happened to finally publish the finished guide on the 10th of July 2018, which is Proust's birthday. I made an effort in constructing the guide. Proust's novel is extremely beautiful. It is an aesthetically rich, dense, profound work. And as a way of calling in people who had already maybe had that experience of Proust, I wanted to make my guide as visually and aesthetically engaging as possible. I wanted to make it attractive. And I also wanted the guide to compete, at least in its own humble way, with all of the extremely sort of highly, value-added, aesthetically attractive things that might otherwise be distracting them on the internet, so as to pull in users and to get them interested in Proust. Like I said before, there was some manual coding involved in creating my guide, but not very much. And really, I designed the guide with the broadest possible audience. So people here at UB who are academics or studying Proust in the classroom, as well as people within the local and regional community, and people worldwide who are simply interested in reading Proust in English and also reading things on Proust in English. The response to this was really kind of surprising. First of all, people around me said that they found the guide very impressive. Eventually, that sort of drizzled its way down into our public relations unit, and people sort of handle promoting projects and things going on at the library to the wider world. They featured my guide in the back page of sort of the in-house, sort of the humble little in-house libraries magazine, and they also promoted my guide on social media. So it started to sort of seep in online. What happened then was that a local guy who happens to be a retired district attorney and a present judge in Erie County here in Buffalo saw the story, got in contact with me, and now it ends up we are co-leading a local reading group on Proust. By another sort of circuitous route, a person in New York City who is part of an organization called the Proust Center at New York Public Library got in touch with me and invited me to attend some of that center's activities. And there I got to know 3 scholars at the first talk that I attended, one of whom is the actual Proust librarian, the only person in the United States with that title, the Proust librarian at the Cole Proust Archive at University of Illinois, which is where Proust's correspondence is held here in the United States. And I was also invited to attend the Proust 2019 conference at Columbia, where I met many more people, and I continued to promote my guide and get a lot of great feedback on it. This past summer, I decided to push my guide by direct email to scholars whose work appears on the guide, and I got a ton of great feedback that way. And I also pushed the guide to the listserv H Français, which is part of HNet, and I believe they included it on their resources page. And all along the way, I've received a ton of praise. I got personal emails from the scholars who I contacted saying, wow, this is really a great resource. I'm going to use this in my teaching. I'm going to use this in my research. And my experience was essentially a surprising one of, discovering a community, like I said, that didn't necessarily correspond closely to things in my immediate local community at my university, but people out there whose, I could bring my expertise to them. I could build a project that was attractive and useful to them, and to be picked up and have people interested in what I'm doing and give my library a good name and also give librarians as such a good name. One of my subsequent contacts at NYU spoke to a dean at NYU and showed her my guides on Proust and other subjects, because I have several guides like this. And this dean at NYU said, wow, can our librarians do something like this? Right? So in a certain kind of indirect way, I'm also kind of showing people even at other institutions what librarians are capable of and the resources that we have at our disposal. Of course, there's all the praise and all the emails I've gotten, but really, when you get down to brass tacks, it's important to actually look at the usage statistics for the guide. And I'm very happy to announce that in a little less than just 1 year of its existence, for a humble LibGuide on a university library's webpage, it's received more than 4,000 hits. And because LibGuides has this feature, I can actually see what the URLs are coming in, referring to the page, how people are getting to the page. And I'm finding that the guide is being organically searched and accessed from places as far away as Japan, Croatia, Hong Kong, and of course France as well. So people all over the world are finding this guide and hopefully using it. In the future, my strategy is to work with our web designer here on possibly search engine optimization to sort of get the guide higher in results and get it targeted to people who are searching for it through Google and other places, and also to continue to grow and refine the asset list, which is to say to keep on adding content and possibly changing the structure of the guide as it grows. So my method in quick overview: if you're interested in doing a project like this, it's very low stakes, no budget, but also has the potential for a very wide reach. The first thing you want to do is pick a topic that you care about, that you want to learn more about, and you want to build community around. In my own case, it ended up not mattering very much that there was nobody in my local context who really cared about Proust except for me, because by building the guide and by distributing, I found that community. So start with something that you're interested in, that you think a resource should exist, that it's not there, something that perhaps, like me, you have a list of resources already at hand, or something that you want to build a list of resources around, and use that to start your own project. The second step, of course, is, if you haven't done so already, to conduct the thorough kind of research the librarians are good at, that we're already capable of doing, whatever form that might take, depending on the topic that you want to work on. And of course, think about how you're going to organize the results and structure the guide so that it's as user-friendly as possible. The third step is to start learning about the real possibilities in the LibGuide's framework, take some of those tutorials, maybe draw on past coding experience, or maybe learn some coding on your own. Again, it's not entirely necessary. And acquire some basic skills, read some things about design, how to arrange information visually on a web page that'll bring users in and keep them looking at it. The next step, of course, is to develop a robust and attractive guide that's accessible and useful for a broad audience, both inside and outside your organization, to actually put it together, all the while thinking about its users and thinking about how to structure the content the best way. And lastly, of course, as the last steps of my own experience showed, to put the guide in the hands of the people who will use it, appreciate it, and want to help you maintain it. So that involves a lot of outreaching to maybe even very distant communities, but also marketing. The takeaways of my experience are very simple. There are a lot of digital humanities projects out there now. Some of them are very complex. Some of them are very costly in terms of labor, in terms of information load. What my experience has shown me is that even though those are maybe very valuable, in many ways, digital humanities doesn't have to be fancy. When we use digital technology in any form to advance the work of humanistic scholarship in a way that is substantive and responsible, we really are doing DH. The second point is that librarians really demonstrate value wherever we directly and unobtrusively contribute value. That can happen locally with a local community and their local demands, but it can now also happen globally. My own experience, because I was helped every step of the way with a project that didn't necessarily respond to a local demand, my experience shows that no one in their right mind is going to resist or obstruct a project that reflects well on you, your library, or your institution. Despite the fact that I didn't have any faculty or student buy-in, I got support for my work every step of the way, like I said. My last point is that I would encourage you, if you're interested in a project like this, traditionally, I would encourage you to think about how academic librarians traditionally have been, they've been professionals who acquire, curate, and disseminate other people's content, and they cast themselves strictly in a supporting role to an existing community and its projects. The attitude that I think this project has pushed me to adopt is that along with the opportunities and the motives we now have to create our own content, as I did, we also have the opportunities and motives to initiate our own projects, and whether or not that community exists locally, also to find or create our own communities online or off. So I look forward to hearing your questions after Emma's presentation, and with that, I will turn it over. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. That was a stunning project. I'll check it out more thoroughly after we're done here. That's great. Yeah, so I'm going to take a few minutes to just share my recent research project with you. I hope everyone can see it there. So my project was looking at the relationship between Catalan identity and the landscape of the Roussillon province in France. So the harsh terrain of the Catalan area are all symbols of the nation that developed among them. So the olives, the cypress, the mountains, the vines. But also the French and Spanish sides of the border have this common natural environment that existed in their history before they were divided up politically. So I really wanted to see how that was reflected in literature, especially in the early 20th century, which is kind of the area I study. So I chose 3 authors, 2 from France and 1 from Spain, to look at how they used the landscape of the Roussillon in their work. So I chose from Spain, Joseph Pla, and his novel, La Catalunya Vieja, Notes de Viaje. And then from France, I chose Joseph Sébastien Pons, Paysage Familier, and Roses y Cypress. And then also Jean Amad, Mélange de folklore and Origine première manifestation de la Renaissance littéraire en Catalogne. So they're all kind of mapped out here in different colors. And so what I kind of wanted to see was, where do all 3 kind of focus their attention, and how does this show that these landscape elements are cultural points that all 3 authors will refer to. So I'll have to just zoom in here so you can see. The first kind of area, I'm going to show you just a couple of the findings that I had and what the authors talked about that I found interesting. And the first one, of course, is Canigou. So Canigou is the highest mountain in this area of the Pyrenees, and it really dominates both sides of the country, so the French landscape and the Spanish side of the border. And all 3 authors mention it, as you can see here. So from Pla, the Spanish author, he talks a lot about the benefit of having this mountain for the agricultural reasons and the water that it provides to the lower valleys. But he also says that when you see Canigou as a Catalan, you feel like you need to go and see it close up. And that's reflected too by Ahmad here. Tout Catalan qui n'a pas entrepris cette ascension ne connaît pas une des joies les plus pures et les plus pleines. So every Catalan needs to go and climb Canigou. He also says that these Pyrenees, far from being a barrier, are actually a point of connection between the French and the Spanish Catalan communities. So he just is kind of defending the fact that this is a united group. And then from Pons's point of view, and all of the two items I chose from Pons are both poetry, so it's a little bit different in terms of the way he goes about describing it, but he does say that it is the queen of the horizon on both sides. So Canigou figures very prominently in both, on all three authors' descriptions of the area. And then just moving further down, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of points you can see around here. This is kind of the Tet Valley. And what Pla has to say about this area is that it's infected by tourism. So one thing that came up as I was studying this is that there was a lot of second home ownership by Northern Europeans at this period. So different properties were being bought up, they were being renovated, some of the traditional plants and landscape elements were being removed. And there's actually a piece in a newspaper that says that some of them were stealing rocks from the cloisters at Saint-Martin-de-Canigou to build their mansions. So there's a lot of political reasons why we see so many points here. I won't go into detail of all of them, but just so you can see that that's why this area is so popular with all three authors. Moving down the coast, here, one of the landscape elements that comes up a lot are the cypress trees. And cypress trees in kind of the classical tradition have always been kind of the guardians of cemeteries, and they're placed there to defend against ill winds. And that tradition kind of continues on through all of the Mediterranean literatures, but also in Catalan literature. And so it's brought up here, you can see in Pla, he talks about the rows of cypress in Albera who defend against ill winds. And that same sentence structure is brought up with Ahmad as well. This is Pla. If I can bring it up here. Yeah. Qui dirait jamais les services qui nous rendent des cyprès aux puissances malfaisantes portées par les vents, leur forme souple et opulente offre une infranchissable barrière. So exactly kind of the same imagery from the three authors is used there around the cypress trees. And then the last kind of element I wanted to get into was the vines. Now, again, an important political event that was happening around this time was the 1907 winemakers revolt. So this whole area was embroiled in a very heated and violent kind of uprising of winemakers and laborers. Who, were hundreds of thousands of them took to the streets in Béziers, Perpignan, Montpellier, Narbonne, Nîmes. And it's reflected in the literature that I found from both authors. So just take a look at Ahmad here, who says, un préfet conseillait certains jours à nos braves vignerons en détresse de planter des amandiers. So to our winemakers who are in distress, why don't you just plant almond trees? Because obviously winemaking is not feeding you. So maybe it's time to give up and just plant something else is basically what he's saying. And it's interesting to see what Pla says, because he's kind of a bit of an outsider here. I'll just bring it up. he really links the vine with Catalan Seni. Seni is the characteristics of the Catalan that distinguishes them from the rest of Spain. So whereas you might see a Spaniard as being maybe hot-blooded and passionate, the Seni for the Catalans is that kind of cold-blooded pragmatism and practicality that they feel that they are known for. And Pla says that the vision of the vines growing in the Roussillon are really an emblem of that Seni, because it's such a poor landscape, and yet the tenacity of the vines struggling to survive here and produce something beautiful and rare really is a testament to the human ability to kind of dominate this territory, which doesn't have much to offer on its own. But he does complain later about the monoculture in France. So what he says is the thing that makes it less Catalan is the fact that it's a monoculture. So in the Roussillon, they basically planted vines and produce wine in exclusion of everything else. Whereas in a traditional Catalan landscape, you would see what he calls la masia, which is the family homestead, a very small farm which would grow wine for its own use, but also grow vines for its own use, but also would have, some animals and, other types of crops, all meant to serve that one family unit. And he says the fact that those masia have been destroyed, those small farmhouses have been destroyed to, have these large acres of vines dominated by maybe a chateau, is kind of a lacking or a degradation of kind of the original Catalan landscape that it should have been. So interesting to see kind of the political elements that enter into these discussions of landscape. Anyways, I haven't quite finished doing Rosacea cypress, which is one of the Pond's books, but I'm taking an upcoming research leave in January, and I plan to translate all of the excerpts into English so that it's more accessible to scholars from different areas and who have different linguistic capacities, and also to include more of that Rosacea cypress there. So that's kind of all I wanted to share today. So I'm curious to hear if there are any questions or comments. I'd be grateful to hear them. Thanks. Hi, Brian. I think I meant to pass it over to you.
Okay, so okay, yeah, there we go. Let me get my screen back up here. Okay, so if anybody has any questions at this time, please feel free to throw them into the chat window, and
Ryan, if there's time, Nicole mentioned to me that it would be okay if I took a couple minutes to actually just show around the Proust guides, just some features, if people are still getting their questions. Oh, there's a question for me right now. Okay. Yeah. Hélène is asking how long it took me to create the Proust guide. It took about 3 to 4 months of actual work on the guide itself, but like I said, it was basically 3 years of my own bibliographic research, seeking resources out, reading them, doing citation chaining, finding the books and articles that would be most valuable. It was essentially 3 years of work on my own time and my own research agenda, my own book that I want to write eventually. So it was 3 years of prep work, then followed by about 3 to 4 months of actual site building. So the content is perhaps a little more, the bibliography that I built is going to be much more substantial than, say, a topic that you pick up and build along with the guide. But so yeah, 3 years with an adjunct of 3 to 4 months of actually building the guide. And if you don't mind, I'll share my screen right now. I can actually show you around the guide a little bit, just like Emma did with her with her site. So, okay. So this is the guide. I designed sort of a not very intense, there's not much content on this first page. This is just sort of the landing spot. It's research.lib.buffalo.edu/Proust. This is what people see immediately. I tried to sort of brand it institutionally, but also make it attractive with the use of the painting. Down below, there's just some information about what's on the guide, the scope of the guide, what it's for, what its audience is, contact information for me, and then links to the main sections of the guide, and those correspond to, of course, the sections up here in the tabbed nav bar. I'll take you through a few of these. I'm not going to take you through all. This was actually the first tab that I worked on, which is just resources on Proust's life. I wrote all the copy that you see on these guides. So I wrote a short paragraph about his life, and I also included in each of these gallery boxes, and this is sort of a feature that I use throughout the guide just to organize the actual books that I put on the guide. I think there's somewhere between 400 or 500 books that I added to the guide. And yeah, I mean, in terms of development and time and energy, it takes a lot of time to add, one book after another patiently from the library catalog so that it could come together on the guide like this. But yeah, this is just a plain, straightforward gallery box in LibGuides. You can browse through them by doing this, right? It's called a carousel in web design. The books that I knew the most about on this tab and that I read, I added a little brief description to sort of help contextualize them. I couldn't obviously do that for every book on the guide, just the ones I knew best. Again, the same layout here. This one doesn't scroll because there's only 4 items, but it's a way of, if the resources you have attractive covers, I mean, it's a way of pulling people in visually. And also this format, this way of using galleries to present individual items is a format that people are used to from sites like Amazon and doing online shopping and that kind of thing. And I don't mean to suggest by building this guide that I want people to approach this as a shopper, but they're used to that, and it brings them in a certain way, and you can use the same visual format, the same design format to pull people in to something that's not buying something, but using information resources. Same way here at the bottom of the page, very straightforward, no visuals here, but this is a way of linking to site-specific to actual UB resources. These are reference resources specifically that I looked around in our reference resources to find just brief articles and information about Proust's life. Also at the bottom of the page here, I added these buttons that lead from one tab to the next so that people don't necessarily have to use this button over here to get to the top of the guide again. The works page, there's 2 different, as you can see here on the nav bar, there's 2 different works pages. One is for his works in French, which obviously I had to address, even if the guide does focus on stuff in English, and the other one on his works in translation. Scroll down a bit here. This is just sort of basic information about Proust's novel, how it's broken up, what the volumes are, and then I go into the French editions. This is the most recent Pléiade edition. This is the Folio edition, Folio Classique edition. Further down, I believe this is the Garnier Flammarion. This is the older Pléiade, and then down here at the bottom is sort of stuff that's external to the Pléiade, to the authoritative editions, but are nonetheless, these are sources in French that are nonetheless very important. And again, it's just a straightforward gallery box. The works in translate, I'll skip that one. We don't need to look at that. So historical context, this is probably the most content on one page in the guide. I sort of approached that whole moment in French and European history in Proust's life, the end of the 19th century through about the 20s, so La Belle Époque. It's a fairly complex page, but I used this opening box to break it up into, to give sort of a table of contents for the whole page. Again, adding in paintings, giving it some visual richness so that people aren't just staring at a big block of my text. And then there's a whole bunch of galleries here at the bottom of the page, usually with about 6 books across a piece. These are general sources on France at the fin de siècle. This is specifically on Paris as capital of the Belle Époque. These are all works on women, gender, bodies, sexuality, queerness, morality, that sort of, so, as I was putting these things together, I had to think about sort of regions of research and major foci of scholarly discourse, and I came up, I think, with some pretty good ones. I'm sure there's a different way of doing it, but these are ways to sort of break up the great mass of work on Proust into pertinent areas. There's a host of works here on the Dreyfus Affair and the position of Jews in modern France, which is important in Proust's novel. Larger kind of revolutions in French culture around the moment of sort of incipient modernity in the beginning of the 20th century. Stuff on World War I, obviously also central to Proust's novel. Things on resources on technology, technological innovations at the beginning of the 20th century. planes, cars, bikes, cinema, photography, radio, telephone, all those things play a role in Proust's novel, and they were all brand new technologies at the beginning of the 20th century. A box on medicine and psychiatry in Proust's novel and elsewhere, sort of some historical works about the practice of medicine, practice of psychiatry in Proust's time, and then some sort of like very heavy-hitting sort of philosophical works to give an idea of what the most serious thinkers during that period of time in Europe, in France, and elsewhere were thinking. Also, you know, resources from Henri Bergson, who is often talked about in connection with Proust. Things from Heidegger, things from Schopenhauer, whom Proust admired a great deal. Also, you know, Max Weber, Freud, obviously, Nietzsche. So just this is not meant to be an exhaustive bibliography, obviously, of works that lead into these thinkers. I was just giving, you know, major texts. I give them the Cambridge Companions, for instance. But, you know, just like Bergson's Matter and Memory, for instance, and so on, just to give an idea of what the major thinkers were up to. What else we have? This is another very big page. I won't go through this piece by piece. This is actually the most popular page in terms of web hits coming on from outside. People are looking for criticism of Proust in English, and apparently this is where they end up. So again, a whole lot of gallery boxes. I split it up sometimes by type of resource, sometimes by topic. So these are meant as sort of general introductory works. Same here, sort of reference works, guides, sort of nitty-gritty kind of like little commentaries on, you know, who this person was and what this building meant and that kind of thing. Collections of scholarly essays and so on, just sort of according to subject area or just sort of functional area. Then to the two portions of the guide that I'm actually most proud of and that I think really kind of blow people away when they look at it. I'll show you this one. So this is the art tab. Proust in his novel makes reference to a great number of works of art. And now that, of course, you know, people have Google, if you're reading along in Proust and you have a smartphone in your hand, you can easily Google to find the image, an image of the painting he might be talking about in a given chapter, a given passage. One of the things I wanted to do with this guide was to give easy access, sort of a step-by-step, painting-by-painting guide of the paintings that Proust refers to through his novel. So, for instance, in the second part, actually, I think the third part of the first volume of Proust's novel, which is Swann's Way, the first painting he mentions is Vermeer's View of Delft. There it is. The second painting is Peter de Hooch's Mother at the Cradle, or at least an interior by Peter de Hooch. And over here, of course, is the passage where Proust refers to the painting in question. I've highlighted the specific reference in red. Up here is a selection of links to local resources, to stuff at UB that's accessible to scholars and students here at UB. And I also, of course, cite where I got the image. And let me tell you, if you want to build a guide that involves any number of sort of, if you want really rich visual images, very high-res images, you want to work with art at all in a guide, the internet, just the wiki sites alone, is a great source for public domain, freely available, high-resolution works of art. Here's a Botticelli, for instance, a detail of the same Botticelli, a bust, a very famous painting by Domenico Ghirlandaio, and so on, another one by Tintoretto. And I couldn't, you know, it would have taken a very, very long time to actually do the entire work. So far, I plan on adding to this in the future, but so far I've done the first two volumes, Swann's Way and Within a Budding Grove. Another tab that I'm very proud of, and I'll try not to go on too long, another tab I'm very proud of is the music tab. This includes information here, again, you know, a blurb by me about music in Proust. And this includes links to databases that we license here at UB, links to recordings available either online. Actually, I think, yeah, all these are linked to online available recordings through the Naxos Musical Library, which we have a license to here at UB. And again, it's a gallery type setup. I had to break these up into multiple galleries, but they're listed alphabetically by the name of the composer. So for instance, I think at one point Proust mentions Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. If I click through on that link, it takes me directly to access of a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony from within the Naxos Musical Library. If I can get back to my, there I am, okay. So again, that sort of is a full breakdown of, along with links to our musical resources, that's a full breakdown of links to musical works referenced by Proust. And then on this last tab, I had miscellanea, but some of these are really substantial. This is sort of the four major films that have been based either on Proust's novel or Proust's life. The Captive, more recently, with directed by Chantal Akerman. Raoul Ruiz's Time Regained, Swan in Love, Volker Schlöndorff, and Percy Adlon's Celeste. Here's some books, not in the academic press, but in the popular market that are still illuminating and very interesting. I have here, like, for instance, Stephan graphic novel version of Proust's novel, Clive James's rather peculiar verse commentary on Proust. It's a long poem about Proust. But, you know, things like that can nonetheless enrich the guide. Here's just a sort of a straightforward collection of links. I haven't done much with this, but this is a link to, these are links to societies and other sites around the internet that are of interest to Proustians. And here at the very bottom is a set of videos. This was interesting to mount. It was interesting to figure out a way to do this in the gallery format. But videos on YouTube about Proust or related to Proust. So there's radio interviews, there's different kinds of documentaries and that kind of thing. So I will turn it back to all of you for questions.
Okay, it looks like we have a question for Emma. Oops, lost it just there for a moment.
Yeah, I see it there. It says,
Okay.
you mentioned that PLA said tourists were infecting cities, which is a negative statement as well as a medical health one. Can you speak to this more? One of the interesting things about PLA is that he focused a lot on the flora and fauna. He wasn't really interested that much in the landmarks or churches or monuments. There's a whole chapter in his book on the markets, like the food markets and what is produced there, and how food and the cultural aspects of food is important to the Catalan nation. So I think that he really saw it as the destruction of the natural landscape, the natural plants, in terms of kind of Northern Europeans buying up these properties and kind of changing the landscape in that way. So I think he saw it as a disease that was spreading over this area of Catalonia that needed to be remedied by French Catalans if they wanted to continue to call themselves Catalans and live in a traditional way with southern kind of the southern part on the Spanish side of the border. So yeah, I think that he really felt that this was a very real and present threat to this older part of Catalonia, the French side, being stripped away and no longer being able to call itself Catalan. Thanks, that's a good question.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no final questions, I would just like to say thank you to Michael and Emma, and thank you to all of you who have attended today. And
thank you.
Thank you, Brian, Nicole, and Emma, and everyone else.
And if anybody wants to submit, ideas for next year, please keep that in mind. There will be a call for that, coming next spring sometime. But thank you again, everybody, and I hope you all have a great day.